Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to iNACOL's May Leadership Webinar. My name is Natalie Abel. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director here, and I will be helping to facilitate today's webinar. So I am honored to be joined here today with Chana Cook-Harvey, who's the Senior Researcher at the Learning Policy Institute, and we're going to spend the next hour or so diving into some of the research and work they are doing around the learning sciences and discussing what that means for K-12 education around personalized learning and competency-based education specifically. And Chana will get into this in a little bit more detail, but the Learning Policy Institute will be publishing a report on the learning sciences, and I wanted to flag this for folks that you should have received an email from Janet Minter on our team that had an attachment to it. And that attachment is a summary of key findings that we will be discussing in today's webinar. So it might be helpful for you to pull that up and have that side by side to refer back to. So before I hand it off here, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over with you. So if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We'd really love to know who you are, where you're tuning in from, some of the work that you're engaged in, and what you're really hoping to get out of today's webinar. We really want this to be an interactive, meaningful discussion.
Found what are some tools we designed to develop metacognitive thinking and reflection? Us learning around well-chosen tasks that are challenging and relevant. So, thinking about multiple representations and multiple modalities for learning, figuring out what are some tools that might reduce cognitive load for students. The note-taking tools or being able to talk with partners, really thinking about how to reduce anxiety if students have stress around math or around public speaking, different ways that teachers and leaders can help really facilitate students easing into those sorts of areas to reduce their anxiety. And again, designing tasks that are authentic and well supported. Next area is focused on learning how to learn. So to enable learning that is transferable and supports a growth mindset, teaching should be designed to develop metacognitive thinking and reflection. Us adults, we know that this is a critically important thing for us in our jobs, in our lives, to really be aware of ourselves matters greatly. It's important to understand that there are general trends in development, and yet the processes of development are individual, occurring within concentric circles of influence, beginning with the family, extending to the school, the community, the larger economic and social forces that influence children's development directly and indirectly. So in order to support student success and to achieve greater equity in both opportunities and outcomes, schools must address the whole child and personalize learning in ways that take these factors into account. So school climate is an important element of supporting student development and learning. There's been hundreds of studies of school climate that have found that positive school climate actually supports achievement, increases student behavior, makes their behavior more positive, increases the likelihood of attachment between teachers and students with one another, and leads to stronger long-term outcomes for students including graduation rates, college attendance rates and graduation, life expectancy. I mean, the list goes on and on. The climate within which students are expected to learn really matters. Next, I'm going to, given this, I'm going to launch now into the review of the practice principles that we're going to be highlighting in this upcoming paper and that were summarized in the pre-reading that Nicole mentioned at the top of the webinar. All right, so this first big bucket here is around the environmental conditions. So science has found that positive adult-child relationships from birth to adulthood are foundational to healthy learning and development. Students also need to feel a sense of belonging or the perception that they are accepted and valued, which can help learning by increasing motivation and effort. So to foster positive, trusting relationships, key findings from the science of learning and development and from educational research suggest the following principles for practice. Number one, structures for effective caring. So schools and classroom structures should be designed to create and support those strong attachments, positive long-term relationships that can provide both academic and social emotional support. So some examples of those structures include advisories, which are similar to what might be traditionally called a homeroom, where students stay with a teacher and a cohort of students for sometimes a year or multiple years or an entire school school experience, so all through high school or all through middle school, for example. Block scheduling, looping, or having teaching teams that share different students where teachers can collaborate and brainstorm together. Schools with longer grade spans, including kindergarten to 8 or 6 through 12, where students and teachers have more opportunities to get to know each other longer. The second area is around the importance of schools and classrooms really being developed as learning communities where all children feel a sense of physical and psychological safety and belonging, where teachers engage in practices that help them know their students well. So, intentional community building activities is an example where, also where schools or classrooms establish shared norms, creating identity-safe spaces where people are respected and where stereotype threat is reduced. Engaging in two-way pedagogies where teachers can learn about their students as well as teach them. And then again, having structure and consistency from class to class is also an important piece. The third area here around trust and alignment among adults. So school practices should be designed to strengthen relational trust among educators and between school staff and families and really thinking about the school and the home as an alliance, and trying to find ways for there to be congruence between the two, and where there is disconnect, where schools can really try to understand what's happening for families, what's happening for children. And some ideas around how to do that is engaging in responsive kind of distributive leadership, where families are encouraged to participate authentically in the school, offering collaboration opportunities among staff, where, like I mentioned earlier, we're planning and teachers can address problems of practice that are common across different classrooms, or engaging in home visits, for example. I know some schools do that really frequently, where members of the faculty and staff go to the homes of the kids and get to know them in their space, and that in very important developmental context. The second big bucket here is about the intentional development of social, emotional, and academic skills, mindsets, and habits. So we all know that learning happens in social contexts. Studies of the brain in action reveal that different parts of the brain that control social, emotional, intellectual processes work together when a child is learning. So for example, the areas of the brain involved in memory are strongly tied to the areas involved in emotion. That said, these intellectual processes work together when a child is learning and cannot be separated. And so the science of learning and development suggests the following principles, where schools and classrooms should provide regular opportunities to integrate social emotional skills into academic curricula and throughout the school day. Studies of high schools have found that positive effects on student engagement, achievement, and behavior when social emotional skills are infused into the teaching of academic content areas.
Wonderful information. So
an example of that might be, as students are working on a difficult math problem or on a difficult project of some sort, teaching students how to collaborate with one another, how to deal with conflict resolution, how to take feedback when they've gotten something wrong, and how to take that feedback and retry and keep
also holding to the fact that we
also important is the practice of mindfulness and having tools for stress management. There are some schools do a couple of minutes of meditation every morning, or just silent reflection. Others have peace corners or a frustration corner, where students can go, if they're feeling frustrated, can be aware of their own emotional reactions to something, and have a place where they can kind of get away and recenter themselves and rejoin the classroom when they're ready. The next area is around students receiving guidance and support to develop habits and mindsets that promote perseverance, resilience, and the ability to take and use feedback. So there are key mindsets that really support academic success, including a feeling of belonging at school, students being able to identify that there's value in the work that they're being asked to do, a belief that effort will lead to competence, which is growth mindset, and a sense of self-efficacy, feeling that they are capable, that they can achieve, and that they do have an identity connected to learning. And by affirming competence and structuring these types of opportunities for mastery on authentic tasks, students really can start to develop the types of mindsets that will be critical for them in life, in school, and beyond. The next area is around educative behavioral support. So this is around thinking about discipline and classroom management that is beyond just thinking about consequences, and it's instead thinking about how to take student behavior or misbehavior as opportunities to explicitly teach skills and encourage students to take responsibility for their actions. Restorative justice approaches to discipline are very common and are becoming more and more common across the country. And I think really critical in order for restorative justice approaches to discipline to work, there needs to be an established community to start with, such that students, when they are attempting to repair harm or make amends
I'm going to move on to our
members
next
of the school
question.
community, they need to first feel like they are members of the community. So there's got to be some front-loaded work around establishing
and he wants to get into the topic of professional learning communities, or PLCs.
In order for restorative
curious
justice
how
programs to
PLCs
really work.
factor into
The next big area
what
is
you've
around
learned
implementing
in your research
instructional
in the learning
strategies that
sciences.
support academic capacity, competency, efficacy, and motivation. So learning, we all know, is a function of both teaching, what is taught, and how it's taught, and student perceptions about the material being taught, about themselves as learners. So students' beliefs and attitudes have a powerful effect on their learning and achievement. Furthermore, each student's neurology, relationships, experiences, and context really converge to produce a unique developmental path and performance. So this is, it's dynamic, a holistic understanding of learning that has important implications for designing personalized teaching and learning environments that can really support the development of the whole child. So I'm going to go into a couple of these different strategies. So teaching should address and build on child's prior knowledge and experiences, both to scaffold learning effectively and to inform practices that are individually and culturally responsive. So again, this goes back to where the webinar started around relationships and teachers really knowing their students well in order to really build on students' strengths and interests and experiences where they can design tasks that are authentic and well supported and therefore motivating for students to want to do them. Really focusing on mastery and learning goals and not on competition. Again, that's a departure from what many traditional conceptions of schooling. But research has found that this approach to mastery learning and competency-based learning really is more motivating, especially when tied to authentic, real-world projects and performances of learning. Furthermore, teaching should support engagement, motivation, and understanding by organizing active learning around well-chosen tasks that are challenging and relevant. So, thinking about multiple representations and multiple modalities for learning, figuring out what are some tools that might reduce cognitive load for students. Be it note-taking tools or being able to talk with partners. Really thinking about how to reduce anxiety if students have stress around math or around public speaking, different ways that teachers and leaders can help really facilitate students easing into those sorts of areas to reduce their anxiety. And again, designing tasks that are authentic and well supported. Next area is focused on learning how to learn. So to enable learning that is transferable and supports a growth mindset, teaching should be designed to develop metacognitive thinking and reflection.
Yeah, that's
us adults, we know that this is a critically important thing for us in our jobs, in our lives, to really be aware of ourselves, to think about our thinking, to set goals and plan and find resources and advocate for ourselves. And these are the same sorts of strategies that kids need to learn as well in school, where they can get specific and concrete feedback. And a lot of that happens through tools like rubrics or doing self and peer assessments or doing structured reflection in the form of either a warm-up or an exit ticket.
That they are
and really encouraging these mastery-oriented performance assessments,
and providing a network
through competency or capstone assignments or exhibitions of work
and do right by kids and navigate all the system constraints
to help score and give feedback.
That's a great question
Lots
and
of schools are using those sorts of assessments, and they have proven to be really powerful. And research of outcomes for students around this have been really positive, where students themselves have said, the project that I did in high school where I had to present in front of everybody or has really stuck with me, and I've had to do that multiple times when I've gotten to college. So those sorts of things, thinking about how to create learners who can apply those strategies in different settings. And our final area is around structures that reach beyond the classroom to provide systems of academic and social support. So adversity happens in all communities, as does healthy development. And science has found that stress, although it is a normal part of healthy development, excessive stress can actually undermine learning and development and have profound effects on children's well-being. Effective school environments that take a systematic approach to promoting children's development in all facets of the school and its connections to the community have been proven to be really powerful. So there are lots of well-designed programs and interventions that can buffer children against excessive stress.
Our next question comes from Patrick, and he's asking if you have any further reading available for examples of schools and districts that have implemented
integrated
successful restorative behavior support.
Access to services that can enable children's healthy development. So there's lots of wraparound programs that can provide access to health and social services, either on-site or through community partnerships. You know, if school staff and faculty maybe don't have the capacity to provide certain services or offer certain supports, there's lots of organizations that can come in and provide those services for kids. Universities are a great resource for that. Also, community school designs that provide these sorts of opportunities directly on the campus and sometimes for families have also proven really powerful, especially in getting parent engagement and having parents really feel welcomed on the campus as well. Multi-tiered systems of support really should create a collaborative, unified approach.
Yeah, that would be great. If you have any recommended resources, we'd be happy to email those to all the folks who have registered,
are really important.
So we can certainly help share any links
a good example
or
of this,
case studies that you think
we're on the actually the 50th anniversary of the founding of Dr. James Comer created the school development program.
Our next question comes from John Fay.
Yale University in New Haven in 1968.
Talking about the
really taught the foundation of that particular program as an example here was around teaching all of the staff on campus about the developmental pathways of students and how to really collaborate and engage parents as partners and allies.
Or do you think that the schools here likely warrant a brand new school?
As a result of social stressors, adversity, and trauma that really do impact their learning. So really coordinating those services together are really important. The Dr. Comer's school development program that I was mentioning has been shown to reduce absenteeism, suspension, improve climate, increase student confidence, and strengthen achievement overall. There are lots of places that do various versions of that work and have shown lots of success. And finally, the last principle we're going to talk about today is around extended learning opportunities. Research documents the benefits of enrichment, period. So students attending programs either after school, before school, or in the summer have shown greater academic gains when they attend more frequently and over a longer duration of time where there's high quality instruction. So students also have shown better school attitudes, behavior, and performance. So really thinking about the partnerships with others and other organizations and companies that can provide some of those opportunities in the time when school is not in session are really important factors to think about. So I'd like to also conclude with some other recent data coming out of from some of my colleagues here, where we've done a survey of California principals where 9 in 10 principals would like to receive more professional development on how to create a school environment that develops personally and socially responsible young people and uses discipline for restorative purposes. Redesigning a school organization to support deeper learning for teachers and students, how to lead schools that support students' social and emotional development, and how to develop systems that meet children's needs and support their physical and mental health. These data suggest that there's a real appetite for leaders to know more about how to support their teachers and staff more broadly in creating these systems, structures, and policies that are student-centered and are conducive to student learning. And in closing, the science of learning and development really can help us understand what we should stop doing in education policy and practice that interferes with children's growth, but it also offers as a challenge and a promise to more intentionally design schools and classrooms to better nurture the comprehensive learning and development of every child. And with that, I know I've just kind of thrown a lot of information at you all. I'd love to open it up for questions, comments, and I also want to encourage those of you that are, on the phone to also consider talking to one another, asking each other questions. I don't know if that'll work, but we can try it. So thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I think critical to this is really trying to understand our students well and understand where they're coming from and what their interests are, and really trying to balance that with, the other, honest demands on time for teachers, right, in terms of teaching the standards and standardized testing and all the other factors that are kind of must do. And so how do we integrate those elements with what we know works well for kids at different ages? And I think there's something to be said about letting kids learn at their own pace. I don't know that they're mutually exclusive, and I think it's probably an and here, where there can be ways where kids can work at their own pace without working against those other features of school that are kind of mandatory, where you have to get through this book, or we have to teach this standard, or we have to learn this concept. So I think using a lot of project-based learning or inquiry-based learning, where students can kind of have some boundaries around here are some deadlines, and teachers can definitely scaffold checkpoints along the way where an outline is due at this point, and groups need to produce this together at this point, and to kind of keep kids on task and keep them moving forward, but also giving some freedom around the way in which they get to those milestones. Are there other comments around that, or other thoughts that people have?
Each kid for a successful future. So thank you for that. And I believe we have one remaining question here in the chat box for you. So if anybody else has any remaining burning questions, feel free to add those to the chat box now. But the last question here kind of builds on the culture conversation that we were just having.
And to really provide them the time and the space in order to deal with those problems of practice,
person here is asking if there are opportunities for mentoring or coaching some of the school leadership to help them co-create the culture in their school. Given the apparent demand that you showed by the statistics mentioned in the study of the principals in California
across different schools, but then there's also ways to think about professional learning communities that are within schools. So for example, I've seen schools where the different grade level teams have a common planning time together, or where departments have common planning time together, or both. I think it really gets, I've found it to be most powerful when teachers have space for both of those types of collaboration, where the math department can sit together and think about an assessment that they're doing, a collective assessment, and what are the pitfalls, or what are the challenges, and how does that particular assessment align with what they've identified as learning targets or learning goals for their kids at particular points in the year, as well as shared learning teams. We were just at a school last week and got to observe a ninth grade team where all of the teachers share the same kids, and they were able to really talk about, oh, I'm having this struggle with student X. Does anyone have the same challenge? I've tried this, I've tried that. Do you guys have ideas about what works? So really giving teachers and support staff, frankly, I think considering our para-educators are really important factors here, and our special education teachers are really important, thinking about how we can offer the time and the space for teachers to work together. And so that really gets at the structures of the school, right? The school day, the master schedule. It also is an important component about that. The effectiveness of that collaboration time comes down to school size, right? So in schools that are thousands of kids large, it's much harder to do all the structures, for leaders to figure out how to do those schedules and make those time spaces for people to work with one another. So I think it's definitely a challenge, but I know small schools can sometimes benefit from those, just the sheer number element.
No worries, thank you.
Yeah,
so
I'll just add
I believe we've answered all the questions in the chat box today. I do have one last question for you. So you mentioned that this research would be coming out hopefully July or August. What's the best way for our attendees to find that research once it's published? And we'll certainly be sharing this from the iNACOL
California
side as well.
Performance Assessment Collaborative, which brings together teachers, leaders, coaches, superintendents from across the state to think about how to do performance assessment very well, and having superintendents and principals that are really far advanced along the performance assessment work, be able to talk with those who are just implementing the use of performance assessments in their school sites has been really powerful learning opportunity. Where sometimes you need to ask somebody who's doing it or has done it. So I think that's really important as well. Yeah, there's actually a lot. There's some really good case studies that have been done about schools that have implemented restorative supports. We're also currently working on case studies of schools that exemplify the principles that I just outlined in this webinar. And those case studies should be coming out, we're hoping in the fall, perhaps in the winter, but where we are going to actually go through each of these principles and have been interviewing and observing so that we can really illustrate what these sorts of principles look like in practice. So, so yes, I could share some of the existing research on restorative supports. And maybe we can find a way to pass that on. Yeah.
Excellent. That would be wonderful. There are many folks in the chat box who are interested in joining that mailing list. So
I think it's
we'll be looking forward to that. And we do have one final really important question
one of the
for
hardest
you
things about
before we wrap up here.
That already exists is that
it's from Charlie again at the Center for Collaborative Education. And while she agrees that SEL is critical, she really wants to talk about what needs to happen to ensure that the SEL standards and their implementation do not reflect the
way of thinking about schooling and requires a lot of moving parts that are definitely interconnected and related to one another.
So if you could just talk to
so if you want to implement advisory systems, for example, and really get at fostering positive relationships with folks, so you've got to think about redoing the schedule. And when you're redoing the schedule, you've got to think about, who's teaching what and when. And that requires a lot of input from a lot of people. So although I think it's a lot easier if it's a brand new school and you're able to design for these things at the outset, it can certainly be done as long as you have the buy-in, the will, the interest, and the supports that are needed to really do it well. I think another critical component of transforming and reforming and improving schools is around allowing for enough time for change to happen. I think we have such an appetite in our country around expecting change instantly or thinking about it in terms of 1 year or 3-year goals, and if we haven't reached this point at the end of this time, then change isn't happening. But thinking about incremental and understanding that change really does take a lot of time. And the school development program that I was mentioning earlier, which is James Comer's kind of brainchild that he developed in the 60s, that approach really was about turning around schools that were very much failing. And it requires this distributed leadership where the leader is really open and transparent and willing to tap into and rely on and trust the thoughts and input from their staff and faculty, where parents are welcomed in and really engaged in authentic ways and not just kind of, oh, it's open house, so I'm going to come to open house, or I'm just coming into the school to pick up my child's schedule, but really thinking about ways to think about that alliance between the home and the school. And, I think it also requires a bit of a self-assessment at the outset to think about, okay, what of these things, what have we already done? What do we already have in place? And what can we build on? And what are our strengths? So I think that's another key point, is not having a deficit approach to change. And I think, having that asset-based lens will also go really far with your teaching staff and your faculty and others around, here's what we're doing really well, and we want to do this better, and here's a strategy that we're going to do, or that we're going to try this thing. And I think, it's important for leaders to not put all of the onus on the teachers without providing the requisite supports and scaffolding. Because doing any of these things that, if it's very different from what the norm is gonna have some growing pains associated. So I encourage folks to think about the things that we would do, the supports and structures that we would put in place for kids to try something new, to grow, to really stretch, to take feedback, to do things in a very different way. As teachers and educators, we provide a lot of supports for kids. We got to provide those also supports for the teachers, and frankly, the district providing those sorts of supports for leaders who are going to need coaching and support and guidance and thought partners. So I think it just kind of goes all the way up and down the spectrum in terms of how to do these things. But I think it certainly can be done and should be done in existing schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think there's, as we talk about these things and identify the demand that folks have for wanting to create these very supportive, student-centered, personalized learning environments for kids, there's as much appetite for learning how to do it well and getting support and mentoring around how to do it well. And there's we're not directly involved in providing any of that mentoring and coaching, although we have worked with other organizations that do provide such supports. Just from a California context, kind of off the top of my head, I'm thinking about Envision Learning Partners is one organization here in California that does work with folks across the country to really support school redesign, and they do all of these things that we've talked about here, and really begin by doing kind of an assessment of the different districts or schools themselves to identify, okay, where are you starting from, what's unique to your context, and it's really not about pushing a model, but about kind of using these developmental kind of principles to think about how to implement a change strategy. So that's just one example. There's lots. I'm having a hard time thinking of them off the top of my head. But I think as our nation really starts to think about the importance of school climate and culture more specifically, and implementing and offering opportunities for students to develop their social emotional competencies, there are more people, organizations that are stepping up to really provide those supports. I'm wondering, there might be others on the phone that know of other organizations. I'm sure there's many, but I'm having a hard time thinking of more off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our communications team will be sending out an announcement when it's out with the links and the report. I'm wondering if maybe, Natalie, maybe we can have the email addresses of folks that participated if they're willing to provide those, and we can put them on our mailing list for other LPI for this report and perhaps others that are going to be coming out from our different teams.
Yes,
that's one way to think about it.
Thank you for that very important question and very thoughtful
There's a broader
response.
initiative called the Science of Learning and Development.
We had that question,
that LPI is part of with other organizations.
I believe we answered
like
all of the
Turnaround for
questions here
Children,
today, so I will
American
just
Institutes of
quickly go
Research, the
over
Opportunity
one last
Institute,
slide here.
and
That
Education Council.
consolidate some
There's
resources
lots of us
for you all in
together.
case you're interested
and we're going to be
learning a little bit more
lots
about
of different
this work.
types of research and products.
You can go to the Learning Policy Institute's website
and learn
more
resources
about
that are free
some
of charge
work
for
that
folks
they're
that are
doing
around
and that
these
was
same
mentioned on
principles.
today's webinar.
To
There's
really
also
help
some
folks
other links
have a
here
sense of
for
how to do
you,
this work and where to
and
start.
just
And
would like
examples of
to
it,
throw in a
also,
little
frankly.
plug for the iNACOL Symposium. Attendee registration is
I
now
can add
open
folks' email addresses
for our
to our little
symposium, which is
internal mailing
October
list,
21st to the
or I can just
24th
definitely keep
in
you,
Nashville this year.
Natalie and iNACOL,
And early bird
in
registration
the loop,
is available
and then you can
through
push that
July
out to
11th.
folks
So if you're
when
planning
the
on
paper is available.
attending, please register. You'll save yourself some money if you register by July 11th.
That's such a good question,
so,
and something I've been thinking about a lot. And I think the question about
thank you so much for a wonderful and engaging discussion today. For all of your important information on your forthcoming research, we'll be sure to stay in contact about sharing that research with everyone on the phone today whenever it does come out later this year.
In a lens that is not culturally competent or responsive or culturally aware.
And expertise with us
real question.
and to our presenters. To our attendees
that I've
who asked such
recently
wonderful
been
questions.
thinking about and reading about in this arena around,
we'll be sure to share this recording with you all via email within a couple days. And we hope to see you all on future iNACOL webinars. Thank you very much.
We wouldn't want those assessments to be used for any high-stakes purposes, like, oh, this percentage of boys at this school, don't have any grit or aren't